My name is Evan Rutter. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Alumni and Parent Engagement at CMC, and it's a thrill and a pleasure to have all of you here. This is our first week of CMC Connect's virtual programming after our 5-week hiatus for the holidays. We had Professor Gordon Bjork on Tuesday. We have Zach Weismann, class of '08 today, and we have Professor Pitney at noon tomorrow. We'll have coffee tastings, wine tasting, professor chats, specialized programming for parents, and all sorts of great things coming up. Remember to check your email Sunday mornings for our CMC Connects virtual email. And then we've added a trivia section as well, just to give it a little bit more fun. A few things about Zoom before we get started. Please do make sure that you are muted. The mute button you can find at the very bottom left of your screen. There's also a chat button and a participant button at the bottom. If you click on those two buttons to the right, you'll have two boxes open. The chat box will have people putting in their name and their class here and saying hello. You can also put questions into the chat for Zach. You can either message everyone publicly. You can send me a direct message as well, and I'll ask that question when it's appropriate. In the participant section, you will find ways to change your name, to mute yourself, a few options there, but also to virtually raise your hand. So if you want to ask the question directly to Zach, which I always encourage you to do, click the raise hand feature, and we'll queue you up and make sure your question can be addressed before the end of our call today. At 5 o'clock. Finally, at the very top right, under view, you have an option of speaker view or gallery view. If you are on speaker view, then you pretty much just see me right now with a few other faces perhaps scattered throughout the screen. And if you're on gallery view, you see a lot of people. Up to you how you prefer to experience Zoom. Zach will be sharing his screen, so your screen will change in a few moments. So just keep that in mind. It will go back to its original formatting, but he's put together a great presentation for us for probably 20 minutes or so before we conclude with any comments from Zach and then go into to Q&A. So just do keep that in mind. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce you all to Zach Weismann, class of '08. He's the founder of the MAG Impact Collective. He'll lead us through an interactive discussion on what it really means to find our passion, what to do once we've identified what we're most interested in, and how working to solve some of the world's most pressing problems require supportive systems and new ways of thinking in order to truly support each other along the way. In today's world, with technology and social media abound, and I can tell you social media is quite tricky and quite active. I'm sure you've all seen it. Some of the most important skills we must craft are patience and focus. Something I think we're all struggling with at times, especially in the Zoom world. Zach will share some of his leading tools and systems for achieving socially focused goals, helpful for those just entering the job market to seasoned professionals. Zach was an econ accounting major at CMC. He's currently residing in Dallas, Texas. Zach, thanks for taking the time today. I turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Evan. And it's great to see some familiar faces and lots of new faces as well. I think there was a mix-up on the subject. I was just going to talk about my CMC basketball career for the entire 20 minutes. No, that would only take about 3 minutes. Mike Sutton somewhere in there. Hi, Mike. Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining. I'm excited to dive in. And just to echo Evan and Jenna's wonderful comments, we'll spend about 20, 30 minutes. I have some slides and some discussion to get through. And then we have lots of time for Q&A, which I'm excited about. So there'll be some prompts. There'll be some things to think about. Maybe a little controversy, if you will, in a good way, that I think we'll have a lot of fruitful discussion on. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, Evan, that look good for everybody?
Looks great.
Great. So as Evan said, I'm Zach, CMC 2008, founder of MAG Impact Collective, and we're going to just kind of dive right in. So I came across this quote, and Cal Newport, he's an author and an MIT professor. Maybe some of you are familiar with his books. He's written a whole host of books that are really great and informative, very practical. But he had a line in one of his books. The book is entitled "Be So Good They Can't Ignore You." And his quote was, "Following your passion is bad advice." And when I read this and when I saw this quote, I was like angry. I was like, what do you mean it's bad advice? Like, this is what I've been doing for the last 15 years, like trying to find my passion, find sort of a calling, put that into a career, make a living off of it, like almost like how dare he? But I have come to realize it is true. And that is a little bit of the discussion that we're going to have here today, is kind of dissect this sort of passion mindset, the passion narrative that I think is is really abound in a good way, but also how do we kind of put that into proactive measures and what can we do about it? So we're going to come back to this. I'll go through this really quickly. As Evan stated, CMC 2008, econ and accounting major. Basically, my career for the last 15 years has been at the intersection of brands and purpose, things like social impact, corporate social responsibility, sustainability, wildlife conservation. As me with 2 elephants, one of which was on Michael Jackson's Neverland. But he didn't have any good stories to tell. And then this picture on the bottom left is actually of my wedding, our wedding. My wife went to CMC. She's 08 as well. Some of you know her. And this was the CMC crew at our wedding. Somebody joked that it was one of the biggest alumni events of the year. So that was a few years ago. In 2018, I founded Mag Impact Collective and most recently launched a project called Make Dents that we'll kind of dive into and get into. So before we kind of get started on this whole passion narrative, passion mindset, I just want to make a point of clarification for kind of purposes of this discussion and presentation, and also in my work. When we talk about passion, obviously that can take many different shapes, many different forms, but we tend to look at it from the lens of, like, if you will, impactful passion. You can think social passion, social impact, positive change, outdoors, natural world, health and wellness. Kind of the question is, what are you feeling called to do? What have you felt called to do? What have you done over your career that is, working to make positive change in the world? When we kind of are talking about passion for the purposes of this presentation, it's more from that lens of, like, impactful passion, and not quite just, some simpler passions like reading and things like that. So as far as the process goes for this conversation, we're kind of going to take it in 3 steps. We're going to break down this quote and kind of understand the passion mindset, the passion narrative, what's a little wrong with it, challenges. We're going to figure out how to reframe it. And then we're going to look at supportive examples, both from community, from individuals as well. So side note, that's not me. I do not know who this gentleman is, but it felt like a very appropriate picture for some bad advice. Either somebody told him or he decided on his own to jump into whatever is lurking underneath there. So this question of why following your passion is bad advice. Let's kind of understand and let's dig into it a little bit. So when you think about that expression, or if you think about when you first heard it or how it's materialized in your own life, your own career, both either professionally or personally, the emphasis of that statement is kind of in the wrong spot. Identifying what you're passionate about, really, if we stop and think about it, is the easy part. Taking that passion and then figuring out what to do with it, where to do something with it, how to do something with it, to what scale, to what scope. Do I make a career? Do I do a side gig? Do I volunteer? Do I support it online? Do I donate? That's actually the hard part. Finding and identifying the passion is pretty easy. It's your passion. It should come somewhat naturally. Of course, there's a little evolution there and it takes some time, but it puts the emphasis on the beginning, not actually thus then the work. It also sort of emphasizes that the world owes you something, and we'll dissect this a little bit too. But take, for example, if you think about your purpose and your passion in work, right? And you might think, well, this work isn't fulfilling to me. It's not filling my passion and my purpose. And again, that is actually putting the emphasis a little bit in the wrong place. It's that this work owes me something. It should be filling my passion, my purpose, and it makes some of the mundane, some of the ordinary hard. And it doesn't also nurture the right skills. And a lot of what you see when people take, and we'll share some examples, when people take their passion, causes they're being called to, and put it into play, the skills that are really needed to cultivate and to be patient and to focus and to build a career aren't really nurtured or even really addressed when somebody says, just follow your passion and you'll be happy. So on the bottom, you see kind of the flip. The emphasis is on the wrong side. The emphasis should actually be on the journey. Instead of emphasizing what the world maybe owes you or what we're unconsciously expecting. It's actually about building career capital, building skills, and building things that makes you really valuable to causes, to other organizations. For the right skills, too, we'll also sort of see and dissect, and we talk a lot this about in my work, is patience and focus. And we'll kind of understand and talk a little bit more about why those are really important these days. So as you kind of look and dissect the passion mindset, begs the question, so kind of what do you do instead? How do you build career capital? And there's a quote that's attributed to Steve Martin: become so good they can't ignore you. And Cal Newport has pointed out the importance behind this quote is about building skills and investing in yourself to be so good, to be so driven or so motivated that you understand what you have to offer. And again, he kind of dives into the description a little bit here more. When you focus on what only your work has to offer you, it makes you hyper aware of what you don't like. When you enter the working world, I know we have some students on here with a passion mindset, those mundane tasks that many of us have had to do to get autonomy in our career, or sort of pay your dues, are really frustrating. And that bureaucracy is something that can really struggle, not to mention what we're going to talk about, a lot of external forces. So again, a sort of a practical advice is flipping it and saying, okay, how do I become so good? How do I cultivate the right skills and mindsets that whoever they are, an organization, cause, a coach, can't ignore me? And how do I sort of go about it as a way, like as if you're a true performer? So obviously, want to talk a little bit about kind of why this matters and sort of why now. I've had some great conversations with Jenna, Evan, and some other CMCers about sort of the timeliness of this. There's a lot obviously going on in the state of the world, but one framing I found that's really helpful is it feels like we've sort of moved past what most call the information age, and we've sort of entered into what I'll call this age of knowing. And what we mean by that is we know the effects of our actions, our work, our day-to-day on each other, on a global economy, on the planet, on health, on wellness. Like that evidence, that science is there. Sometimes it feels like we still have to debate that, but it's there. And we know these effects in this interconnected world that we live in, i.e. we're living in one of those right now. Obviously 2020 has been an incredibly difficult year for so many people. We've lost lives, a global pandemic. Harsh reality there is if you look at climate science and wildlife conservation, it's slated to get worse in terms of the exposure to new species and thus new diseases as we encroach on wildlife habitat. Climate change, of course, is an external issue that many of us are already feeling the effects of, especially those in California and some coastal states. Some argue that we're in the 6th mass extinction already. And income inequality is something that I think many issues intertwined here, of course, systemic racism being one of them, as often a root of income inequality. But the reason we kind of bring up these global cases and these global challenges is it speaks to this passion mindset and this calling of how do we work to help solve some of these problems? Or if you are feeling yourself, especially after a year like 2020, inclined to want to do more and to act on this purpose and this passion, then that's great. I mean, these are very real forces that have affected many of us and are really a call to action in a lot of different ways. I did come across a really interesting statistic lately. I know CMC, I'll put my econ degree to good use here. If you have 4,000 US dollars, you're in the global top 50% in terms of wealth. It's only 4,000 USD. Just some good perspective on terms of the global economy and a reminder. So there's a global case for taking our passion, taking our impact, and putting it into play. There's also a very real business case. There's a lot of statistics and metrics out there, and I'm sure some of you work in areas of this or have had exposure to some of this, but 66% of consumers are willing to pay for more impactful products. Some of you work in various elements of sales, or you're selling a product or an item. There's a real demand for that. Look at organic food as one of the fastest growing sectors in the food industry. 68% of millennials want to work for purposeful companies. So that touches hiring, that touches jobs, that touches workforce retention, business development, organizational development, etc. There's also the financial piece. The ESGs is a sustainability environmental framework financially. We can share a link and share some more context if anyone's not familiar with that. But the ESG asset valuation right now is 40 trillion, and that's tripled over the last 8 years. So again, financial institutions are looking at sustainability, environmentally friendly practices, and thus businesses. And that's really been driven out of Europe that the US is starting to catch up and get behind. There's also the individual case for kind of this passion and purpose mindset. These are actual screenshots of all of my stuff. This is my email. These are Slack groups I'm in. This is LinkedIn, Twitter, news. I think these were from today, maybe yesterday. I feel it. I'm curious in the Q&A how many of you feel this sort of information overload. Evan already alluded to it a little bit about social media. It's everywhere. And sort of this individual case, I think many people feel this pressure. We sort of feel like something doesn't quite feel right, or maybe things aren't sustainable. And especially after a year like 2020, are looking to say, well, what can we do about it? How do we create change? How do we, again, put these things into action and build skills and try and help solve some of these problems? Some fun facts: if you say on average you sleep for 8 hours, there's 960 minutes in a day. These are my actual iPhone stats from like this week. And so I average, and I'm not proud of any of these. I average 4 hours and 22 minutes on a phone. And I get 364 notifications a day. And I pick up my phone 108 times. So that's one notification every 2.63 minutes and a pickup every 9 minutes. Not great. And part of that obviously is due to COVID and the work that, being digital and being remote and having a child to take care of. But it's really interesting to take a look at. So I think overall, many of us feel kind of distracted, overworked, mentally unhealthy. I think there's been a little bit of obviously some social media techlash that I think is very real and palpable. So you have sort of the global case for why understanding what you're passionate about and thus building the skills and putting that into play is important. You have the business case, there's huge opportunity, and then also sort of the individual personal level as well. Also, I think 2020 has sort of made us question a lot about values, directly and indirectly, consciously and subconsciously. I know it has for me and my family. If any of you have seen the movie WALL-E, I'm a huge fan. It has a sort of a dark under theme to it, but I think a lot of the sort of the narrative, the things that WALL-E projected, we've essentially destroyed our planet, we're addicted to technology, and we live in space, and we're overweight, doesn't seem too far off. And so it's just a good, if you have not seen it, watch it. I always recommend it. My wife will make fun of me for putting that in here. But it's, again, this notion of where are our values? Are our values aligned? And coming out of a year like 2020, and we're obviously nowhere close to out of the woods, how does that continue to align with our values? Are people feeling called to make a change or to do things differently? Or as assuming things do go back to some semblance of normal, what is normal? How do we define it? So we've understood that changing the passion narrative to focusing more on the skills, putting it into play, understanding why people are feeling this pressure or a calling from multiple different levels globally, business, an opportunity, and also individually, kind of says, okay, so that's great, Zach. Like, what do we do about it? What can I do about it? Well, turns out a lot. And this applies to, I know we kind of have a wide range of participants here in terms of folks who are 20, 30, 40 years into their career, as well as students who have yet to start a career. And this is kind of applicable to that full spectrum. one of the biggest things that I think we've seen in our work is the stepping up of the business community to create more supportive, inclusive businesses and communities and networks. That's been a really exciting change to see the business world kind of take leadership on their own. And that's led to some wonderful organizations, some alliances, some groups that are really kind of taking their passion and putting it into play financially as well. So some of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with these, others maybe not. Just included a little snapshot of a few networks and groups that we've seen that are really doing great. And shameless plug, we put our own organization in there as well. As far as, and we can come back to this in the Q&A too, if there's one that you wanted me to talk about or touch on. Also, I'm pretty envious of the CMC students, not necessarily the challenges they've had this year, but just in terms of being in school right now and coming into a working world. And this is true for students and then anybody anywhere in their career, like doing good, making a good living and being successful, like is now possible without a doubt. This is actually just a list of some industry sort of issue areas, topics that I've seen in working. You have ed tech, you have social enterprises is now a whole thing that really blew up in the last 10 years. You have community work, which my wife does. You have impact investing. I mean, we won't go through all of these, but the opportunities for a career switch, for also getting involved are huge. I mean, there's so many topics and so many interesting areas in if you feel called to something and you feel like you want to do more, there's so many opportunities to thus do it. Almost to the fact that understanding what to do and how to get involved can be a little overwhelming. Also, sort of on the individual level, a lot of the work we've been doing is, and this goes back to the passion mindset too, in terms of becoming so good that they can't ignore you, is everyone has a lot to offer. I think we're all feeling probably the state of the world, the political crises that have happened, just the Black Lives Matters movement, climate change movement. There's a lot going on many, many fronts. And at times it can feel totally overwhelming and a little debilitating. But the reality is each one of us has a lot to offer. And the way we kind of look at it and frame it is, you look at your hats and that's who you are. We all wear multiple hats throughout the day, especially, and Jenna and I were joking about this earlier, like with kids and quarantine and being at home. I mean, we put on these hats back and forth, back and forth, back and forth all day long, going from parent to worker to parent to worker. And maybe you're caring for an elderly family member. And so we are changing these hats all day long. And it's hard. It's exhausting. And in a social media world and an interconnected world, we change those hats a lot throughout just one individual day that we don't even realize. When we talk about building career capital, there's a lot of your own specific knowledge that you have to offer. Essentially, what comes naturally to you, what you like to do. There's sort of always that question, if money wasn't an issue, what would you do? There's a lot that you can unpack and work from that and build around. We all have very specific knowledge. If you went to CMC, you've got a lot of great knowledge. The other 5 C's did okay as well. We have constraints. We have things that hold us back, right? Both sort of real and even perceived. There is a baseline sort of framing that if we're on this Zoom call together, we are the lucky ones. We are sort of the fortunate ones. And how do you put that into play? That doesn't mean recognizing that we are a fortunate one doesn't necessarily make anything easier, but it helps to start to dissect some of these constraints. We talk a lot about, people often say, well, I just don't have time to get involved or follow my passion or do the work I'm really purposefully, excited about. But we can work with that. You can't make time, but there are things that you can do to understand how to be more efficient with your time. That is a perceived constraint that we can work with. And then you have your path, right? How does a lot of this come together when you take the time to look at who you are, the knowledge you have, what may or may not be holding you back, how it all comes together. And a good reminder for all of us is a 78-year-old just became president. My dad is 75, and I asked him the other day, like, how do you feel now that you're younger than the president? And I guess he appreciated question. I have no idea. Also wanted to share a couple examples. In talking to actually some CMC students, it's been great. We're actually working on a project to kind of create some paths and like kind of help students understand, like almost like benchmarks a little bit, as terms of when they go out into the working world. It's hard, right? There's social media bound, as we saw. It can always sort of feel like somebody's doing it faster, better, stronger, more profitable than you. This speaks to the patience and the focus. How do you hone in and focus and kind of tune out that noise? So in discussions with some of the current students who maybe are on the Zoom, we talked about sharing some examples and also some benchmarks. So there's just 3 individuals that I work with that I wanted to share as examples of just kind of some of the different embodiment of finding this passion, finding this purpose, and putting it into play. One is Tracia Wernholtz. She's a web developer and started her career in IT for the last 20 years. She's been running her own web development, web design firm for, gosh, I think pretty much the last 10, 15 years. Just recently, she created an initiative called Created in Color to help find and recruit and source Black talent on the marketing, design, and development world. She's a founder, mother, and I would absolutely call a change maker. But what's interesting about Tracia is she worked for a long time in IT, and I don't think necessarily would speak to it as necessarily the most. She was interested in IT and studied it, but I don't think it was necessarily filling her passion cup, if you will. But then decided it was time to go out on her own. She had built the skills to start her own business and to do her own thing. And then has led that has led to multiple really purpose-driven passion initiatives and projects that are helping really advance many fronts in terms of minority-owned businesses and sourcing and creating talent from the Black community. Another is an illustrator, John Matta. He's part of our collective as well. Again, I point to some of these examples just to help folks think to help highlight that there's many paths to impact. There's many paths to putting kind of this passion and purpose into play and into work. John designs trading cards by day. He designs trading cards for the NBA and the NFL. He oversees the NFL and NBA photo shoots with the rookies. I'm pretty envious of that. And by night, he's an amazing freelance illustrator. He's done work for NPR, which we show here, Samsung, ESPN. I actually found out about his work years ago because he made a billboard trying to recruit LeBron James to the Dallas Mavericks, which I was pretty excited about. And I reached out to him and now we collaborate on work together. He's also a father, but he is an example of still has his day job and still very much likes his day job, but it doesn't necessarily fill his calling to do more. He's very passionate about voting rights, and he's very passionate about media and also space and space technology. So he, through cultivating his own skills and developing skills over 10, 15 years, has now been able to do projects for NASA, to do a project for the post office and the postal service. One last example here is Joanne Sunshine, who is also part of our collective. Joanne's amazing. She's founder of Connective Impact. She's an example of worked at a very large nonprofit for quite some time, built a lot of skills, networks, understood how the ins and outs of the large nonprofit world works and how to negotiate and understand funding structures, and then went out and for the last 7 years has been running her own consultancy out of Washington, D.C. She's an author of 2 books, actually, Purposeful Profits and Change Seekers. She's a mother of 2 very cute young boys. And again, just an example too of someone who later in career decided, I'm going to take these skills and these things that I've learned at a large organization and go out on my own. Now, again, the message here is not that you have to go out on your own. The message is more that it can kind of take different shapes and paths. And again, there's almost sort of an underlining theme here with these examples is somewhat patience and focus. I do feel that a lot of us feel that impatient drive right now. I think we sort of joke, it's like, yeah, I'm working in climate change for 2 weeks. How come I haven't solved it yet? I mean, these things, especially when you are talking about working to solve big issues, to change a culture on systemic racism, to help try and address climate change, it takes time. And thus that takes patience. And going back to sort of the individual case earlier, that's hard too. That's hard to cultivate the patience and the time it takes to feel okay and to feel confident that you're making a dent in these bigger issue areas. So just to kind of bring it all together here and save time for some Q&A, big takeaway is actually finding ways to actually embrace the journey, embrace that maybe you are on a path where you're building skills and building patience to then create a larger impact. Or if you're working in areas, healthcare, education, tons of areas, how do we embrace the journey and how do we actually support each other in that journey? It's not easy. I mean, can you imagine the healthcare workers on the front lines for this last year? I don't know how they are staying sane and safe. And that is a part of that journey for them. How do we remove our constraints, both individually, both as businesses, both culturally on values to drive to create change? Hence, you see the rise of a lot of these alliances, organizations, collectives, give back programs, and then also looking at our own individual constraints too. What may be actually holding us back from putting that into various levels, from putting that purpose into various levels of action, whether it be donating, whether it be changing a career, whether it may be volunteering, you name it. And then generally support one another in these journeys. I do think it has felt, and I'm interested in the Q&A to get a little perspective from others. It does feel, I feel this weight of the social media and the news and the, even like LinkedIn, for example, that again, it's hard to stay patient based off of those inputs. It's hard to take the time to be patient on some of our outputs when we're constantly being barraged by more and more inputs, where we're not always seeing the full story. So how do we generally support each other through these networks and these organizations once you've identified how you're going to put your passion into play? That's it. How'd I do on time, Evan?
Perfect, right on time.
Thanks. Yeah, and happy to dive into some Q&A.
And great, so I'm going to stop the sharing. I have a few questions that have been submitted. I do encourage you to submit more questions in the chat or virtually raise your hand in the participant section. Raising your hand is always it's always fun, I promise. Zach's a nice guy. So I have a question that came in. Could you speak to the idea of developing one's passion and how someone can discover a passion or passions worth developing over time?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's almost in that, if I'm understanding correctly, in how do you identify and develop a passion?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for purposes, at least we've kind of had on this discussion, I think the calling is one of the ways that we'll often talk about that too. Do you feel a particular issue or topic really tugging at your heartstrings or calling to you? I didn't know I was super passionate about the environment. If some of my CMC classmates who are on this call, if they talk about our time in college, I didn't know I was super passionate about the environment then. It was really after college. And I remember seeing Inconvenient Truth, the documentary, and that really tugged on my heartstrings. And it was like, oh, this is not good. I want to get involved in this. And then it framed, oh, I was actually passionate about this. So one way is to look at the causes and the issues you may find yourself drawn to or emotionally invested in. And you may already be doing some of that subconsciously, organizations you follow or organizations you donate or brands you buy from that you support and like. Another way is to think about essentially that question of what would you do if you didn't have to make money? Travel the world, write books. There's something about that too. If you can remove that constraint, so much of what we do career-wise is obviously driven by money. We have to make some money until, Bitcoin or the robots take over. So if you can remove that and just to ideate and to think about what would you do, then that's getting at something. So those are two suggestions I would say. Think about what causes or calling to you? And also, what would you do if you didn't have to make money? If you could just do anything all day, every day?
Claire Hudson has a great question that she submitted. Hi, Claire. What happens if you fail at your passion? You go down a path that tugs at those heartstrings, but either it's not working out or you're just not good at it.
Hi, Claire. Miss you. Am I allowed to reject certain questions? No, I'm just kidding. That's a great question. Failure is inevitably part of the process, for sure, without a doubt. I think what's really interesting is, if you find something you're passionate about and you're starting to work in that space, we think everything else sort of disappears, and it doesn't. So bureaucracy still exists. Excuse my French, shit bosses still exist. Like, we're still humans, even if we're working in areas that we're really impactful or passionate about. And then also we actually, we forget that stuff sort of still exists, and that the failure is actually a really good learning point. So the example I'll give is when I got after CMC, I went and lived abroad. When I came back, I started working for a wildlife conservation nonprofit that did some really cool work. I was super excited about the work. I loved it. After a couple years, realized the organizational leadership was really bad, right? And I got laid off. A bunch of us got laid off like that on the fly, and that was a failure for me. I went to CMC. What do you mean I'm getting laid off? Like, are you kidding me? And so it doesn't necessarily mean the failure was actually still attributed to the organizational structure, some of that normalcy that still exists, not necessarily my passion. So I think, sort of to answer the question, it's kind of how can you dissect, I'm still passionate about this, but again, it doesn't mean that the path is going to be easy. In fact, actually the path could be harder, but how do I still focus on what's important and try and keep that patience and recognize that whether I am working at a wildlife nonprofit or working at a job I hate, there's still going to be those challenges. There's still going to be some of that failure that we're going to have to inevitably navigate.
Thanks, Zach. That was so smart. I've been on like mute and no video because Zach and I have very similarly aged children, and it's not a good look for toddler time right now, but
Hi,
thank you,
Claire.
Zach. Hi, Zach.
Okay, Justin put a question in the chat. How do you personally balance being patient against results or progression when embarking on your own passion projects or endeavors?
Say that again.
How do you personally balance being patient against results or progression when embarking on your own passion projects or endeavors? So I think that's patient against results or progression when embarking. So it's kind of like I'm interpreting that as you're in your current role, you're doing your thing, you have a lot of high expectations, but you also know you really want to be doing that and you're trying to do that too. How do you balance those two things pulling you in different directions?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, it's a great question, Justin. It's not easy, and I am by no means have nowhere close to mastered that or anywhere close to mastering that. I think it actually is in fact sort of part of the challenge of the journey, and thus also supporting one another. I think there's like basically, I guess I would say very tactically or very tangibly, small things like getting off social media or taking breaks or stop the doomsday scrolling, which I'm guilty of both of those, help, because I think that, just adds to this time pressure that we're feeling that this isn't going fast enough. And it's sort of like, by whose metric? So there's sort of the social component. There's also if you do identify or you're working in a cause, for example, climate change, I feel that a lot with some of the climate change work and organizations we've worked with is you still have to do the work. I'll still be making, an Excel spreadsheet all day. And then you feel like, okay, I've made progress. And then you go home and you open up the news app and the world's on fire. And so there is sort of a balancing act there of trying to stay patient, trying to stay focused, trying to remove some of those inputs that may be distorting your sense of time. And then also reflection. I think that's a big thing that we often sort of take for granted. I'm a big notebook journaler. And so setting quarterly goals and going back and looking and seeing the progress that you've made, and that reflection actually really helps to see how far you've come, and to see the change that you've made is really important. So those are some examples that I hope are a little bit helpful. And join good communities, join other supportive people doing good work like you, and find those people that lift you up in that journey. And that's really key too.
Jenna has actually a very good follow-up to that. What are some suggestions of ways to create more available time in your day for pursuing your passions?
Don't have children. I'm just kidding. Ways to create more time in your day. Yeah. I think there's, again, some people are really into sort of bullet journaling. I don't go sort of that far, but being very intentional about scheduling your day and being proactive, and even scheduling times to do nothing is actually important. Putting 20, if you're somebody who, due to your work or your personality, you live by a calendar, put 30 minutes on your calendar to do nothing or to go take a walk. I've implemented for a long time. I think post-COVID, it's been much harder, but pre-COVID, I had no meeting Monday. And I'm in a fortunate position to be running my own business, so I could do that a little more flexibly than somebody else, but there's components of that you can build in. So trying to be more meetingless Mondays. Exactly. Yeah. It is try to build in that time and that space in your calendar. It's important to remember that often really the good ideas, the creativity comes when you least expect it. Like you get a good idea in the shower, on a walk, or playing with your kids. There's a reason for that. The subconscious is doing its thing. And so we have to get away from all the inputs to let our subconscious do its thing and to focus a little bit more on the outputs. So try to manage time effectively. Say no. That's actually a big one. I'm not naturally very good at saying no, but I'm trying to get much better at it. And look back at a meeting or look at your calendar for the next week. What are the things that you could say no or could prolong or to push forward that free up some of that time for just to slow down, to buy back some of your time? Hope that's helpful.
You touched on this a little bit earlier, Zach, but I want to go a little bit more in depth. Let's say you're going down a path, same career or near similar careers for 20 years, and you realize that is not your passion anymore. But for whatever reason, you're still there. Maybe because you're moving up the corporate ladder, you are, you're doing well in that career, but you're just done. Talk to me about the pluses and minuses of just sticking it out for another 20 years and just doing it. And also completely pivoting, doing a 180 and really going a whole different direction. And what should cause that?
It's a great question.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I haven't experienced that personally, obviously, in terms of just sort of my age. But what I think is there's something that was interesting. There's a lot of research out there that the traditional retirement isn't going to exist anymore. And that's actually from multiple perspectives, right? Sure, Social Security, all that is a mess, but also just in terms of people are living longer, i.e. look at Biden, in terms of oldest president ever, and then I'll knock on wood that he's living longer. And then it's like, so you're seeing these second and third careers of people totally reinventing themselves, which is amazing. And the neat thing about technology is like, you can do that pretty easily, or you can do it on the side, or you can start testing things while you're still in your career. There's a book, Originals by Adam Grant, and he actually went back and looked at some of the big, the start of Apple, some of these big tech companies, and said, when did they jump ship? When did they leave a job and go to this startup or this other gig? And he actually found that people stayed in their current jobs. Like Wozniak stayed at Hewlett Packard for a long time before he finally went to Apple. And so point being there, you can do things. You can test some of these other It doesn't have to sort of be totally changing how and where you make your income. You can start to say, well, okay, let me join a board, because if you're that far in your career, you have a lot of institutional knowledge that other sectors, other organizations, other people will find really valuable. A lot of it is like in the packaging and the branding of your own story, of who would want to hear this, who would want to understand that. You know, if you've worked in education and you've seen changes, well, there's tons of companies that are trying to sell to educators. You know, what would they find valuable? So you can test the waters. I think the challenge with testing the waters is the patience to do so. That I think Justin asked earlier, like, how do you actually give yourself enough patience to see, okay, is this side thing I'm doing, is it actually materializing? Most people sort of give up before the sort of that inflection point. So I think you can think about it. You can look at jobs. I think you can apply, you know, even if you decided I'm out, I want to do something different, there's still a process to that that can take many different forms and shapes. Maybe you apply to 10 other jobs and you realize, well, I'm not getting them, or they're misinterpreting my work. So how can I spend another year or two and build that skill or translate my story so that when I interview again, they're like, great. So I hope that's helpful a little bit, Evan. Lots of paths that it can take.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are your recommendations? Someone is thinking, they have a passion, they've had it for a couple of years, they've been doing it on the side. It's been a fun project, but it's time to take the next step. What resources are out there? Where should they be looking for help? Who should they be contacting in terms of maybe supported reputable companies or people who can help kind of give that push? Are we talking about executive coaches? Are we talking about industry experts? What do you recommend?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot in some sense. One interesting point somebody made to me recently was that a network is a thing of privilege. And I hadn't actually thought about it in that sense, especially for those of us on this call that are fortunate enough to have gone to the 5 Cs and have a amazing network like that is the Claremont College's network. You know, we're pretty fortunate to have that. And so tap into that. And I know many people, many CMCers, of course, are really good at that. But it's actually sort of, you know, in terms of, I bet you know somebody in a 1 or 2 or 3 degrees of separation that you would actually probably really enjoy talking to about their own journey or what they did. Maybe they did it in a different sector. Maybe they had a successful startup. Maybe they failed at it. Maybe they're sort of in, you know, they working in climate change, just as an example, but not quite how you would like to. So one is just try and understand your own network and take the time to go back and look. And I bet there'll be some people that you can reach out to and connect to. The really neat thing also about pros of the internet is there are amazing communities popping up all over the place right now. I think especially due to the last year. I know people are tired of Zoom and Slack, but the cool thing is there's tons of communities out there that are affordable for maybe $100 a year that you can join and find like-minded people, designers, artists, creatives, folks interested in social impact. It's some of the work we do with MAG. So if anybody's interested, we can talk about that later too. And then there's various courses that are out there too, that I think you're seeing this distillation of knowledge in a really cool way, that people are selling courses and bite-sized pieces. They're sort of democratizing all this information out there. Sometimes it's hard to find and to navigate. And sometimes these organizations or alliances that you can join can help point you in the right direction. And those are all across the board. You can look by subject matter. You can look by interest area, like marketing. I just realized #marketing Twitter is a thing that people are obsessed with. I don't know what they do there, but people are very into marketing Twitter. So if you're into marketing, go to #marketing Twitter and supporting each other. So I don't know if that's necessarily the best answer, but there are a lot of resources out there. It's just talking to folks who can help point you in the right direction or help give you a little piece of advice, and then following through and executing on those and talking to people and learning from them.
Great. Next question. I think this might be our last one based on time. A lot of us here work with students. A lot of us here think are young in our career, and a lot of us here have children. What do you recommend if you were giving advice to a college student? I know someone mentioned earlier on the chat they wish they'd seen this in college. How do you recommend people move forward to pursue their passion post college, not just chasing the degree or what's popular? Everyone goes into this. How does one go for their passion in college?
In college or post college?
Post college, but thinking about it while in college.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of that point that was made about hindsight being 2020. I mean, I think a lot of us, my peers who are CMCers, when we look back, we're like, gosh, there was a lot of that the schools offered that maybe I wish I had taken advantage of and capitalized on more. So, those are social clubs, those are cause-based clubs, organizations on campus that you can get involved with that can help. You got to try stuff. I think there's still a lot of, it speaks to this impatience that we all feel, especially us younger generations, but there's a lot of value in the process of elimination. And so you try something, you didn't like it, but okay, what did you learn from it? I had to force myself to understand the value of the process of elimination, because I left the finance world and went to get a job in the environmental space. And so I had to sort of say, okay, what from my experience could I take that, and how do I craft my narrative to change careers? So you try things, see what you're interested in. Don't forget the value of process of elimination, especially while you're in school, and explore the various applications also of your degree. I will say, and I've said this a lot, like as an econ accounting major coming out of CMC, this was 2008, very different time, of course, but I didn't feel like I had a good sense of all the applications of my degree. I felt like there was that pressure to go work at a big financial firm, obviously get a job and a good salary are things that are important, but I wasn't aware that, nonprofits need controllers, or, back then startups wasn't really as big of a thing as it is now, but, they need CFOs, or, they have finance departments. So I think it's basically, looking at your degree and your field and say, okay, I'm getting an input from kind of a few people. How could I expand that? How could I see what other people are doing in this potential path that I'm going down? What is marketing plus healthcare? You can mix and match now any focus, career, or subject matter, and match it to a cause without a doubt. And so matching what you're studying, what you're interested in with causes, and think, if I study communications, well, every nonprofit, everybody trying to sell a product, a socially good product, or raise funds needs communication help. So there's some matchmaking that can happen there too. Hope
Thanks,
that's
Zach.
Helpful.
Zach, would you mind putting your email in the chat so that everyone can see it? Justin put a great comment in that he loves the quote, "There's value in the process of elimination." So that's great. Zach, a big thank you from all of us at Claremont McKenna for your time today and for your continued engagement with the college and with our alumni base. We do have an incredible network. You mentioned it. And we have an alumni directory. We have an online presence, and we're starting actually a new platform. It's called Engage CMC, where our alumni will gather, share job opportunities, help mentor each other. So do look out for that coming in the next week or two.
Great example of a network, of a micro network right there.
Absolutely. And we're doing it. It's like Facebook and LinkedIn comes together. It's going to be great. So everyone do pay attention to that when we announce it in, I think it's in a week, assuming all the data is fixed a week from today. So thanks to all of you for your time. Have a wonderful evening. Remember, we do record these and post them online. So enjoy these into the future, and hope to see you at noon tomorrow with Professor Jack Pitney. Feel free to unmute. Thanks, Zach. And we'll see you soon. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Evan. Thanks, Jenna.